Welcome, everybody, and thanks for being with me this next hour. You're listening to Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks on Transcendental Tuesdays here on 12radio.com, and we are simulcasting on my YouTube channel, which has the same name as the show, Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks. Please subscribe if you like what you're hearing. And also, you can join me over on YouTube while the show is live this morning for the next 15 minutes or so. And because we do have the chat open. And welcome to everybody who's already there. Hey, Leslie, good to see you, and Cherry Tart. And let's see who else is there. Donna, thank you for being here today. And, I know other people are coming into the room. And here again, sometimes I spend a little more time over there than other times, checking out comments. And I try to respond to them when I can during the show. But those of you who know me, I get all wrapped up in what we're talking about on any given day. So it's just the way I am. I love astrology. I love talking about metaphysics and spirituality and a number of different things. So I tend to get pretty wrapped up. But if you have a question, just pop over there and send it to me. Or you can also find my email address on 12listen.com. I think there are links, to our bios over there. And you could send me an email if you have a question, something you want me to address on the show. Or here again, put it in the chat room, and maybe we can even save it for another week or so. And hey, James, good to see you. Thanks for being here this morning. And thanks for your wonderful note that you sent this week. I really enjoyed reading that. So thanks, James, for taking the time to do that. But this is March 24th, 2026. And on today's show, of course, we're going to look at the week ahead. We're going to look astrologically. But unlike the recent past, this week, there's no new or full moons. No planets are changing signs. There's no seasonal changes or retrograding planets. However, true to astrology, there really are some exciting things going on. Specifically, 3 planetary interactions that are involving the sun, which in astrology represents our ego, our sense of identity, Saturn, our sense of authority, and Pluto, the planet of change and transformation. So think about how dynamic this trio of planets really can be when they get together in positive ways, and they reflect mass consciousness. They reflect an energy that we can kind of just reach up and grab. I mean, that's the way I'd see it. Don't ever think that these planets make you do something, because they don't. But they're basically saying, hey, this is my energetic pattern. Do you want to join me? Do you want to access something that I've got that I can represent to you? That's how I see it. So these really are standout kind of interactions that are happening this week, even though it's a week that doesn't have some of those other big things going on. But truthfully, I'm kind of glad that we can really focus on these 3 things, because they're pretty dazzling all on their own. They truly are. So before we get started, though, make sure that if you want more information, or even if you just want to kind of get some of the points that I'll go over in the show, go over to Mark's Power Peak, which you can find the link at 12listen.com. You can also find it on 12house.com. It's an electronic newsletter that you can subscribe to for free. Doesn't cost you anything. And we're not going to sell or give away or share your email address. So if you want to subscribe to that, go ahead and do it. Then you will get that newsletter in your email every single Saturday night. And it's not just the week ahead, which is the column I write. It also has a number of other articles that from, on any given week, they're going to, be whatever's going on for that person who's writing, that author. And they could be on tarot or I Ching or numerology or feng shui, spirituality, mysticism, you name it. You're going to find some interesting things. And I'm a strong believer that you kind of just see what you need to see at any given time. So if you have this sense, oh, I better go over and check that, then there's probably something there that you're going to want to know. You're kind of in the groove. You're tuning into something. So let's move on to the cosmic dance for the week of March 23rd. Now, I was kind of thinking about that idea. When they say March comes in like a lion and it goes out like a lamb. Well, I'm pretty sure that's referring to the actual weather. Assuming that cold winter storms give way to gentle spring showers. But when I looked at it cosmically, I was thinking, that's right. Mars really did kind of come in like a lion. Even though we had a number of planets in Pisces, this is a month that started off with a set of eclipses. The second one, anyway, was in March. It was in on March 3rd. That was a full moon lunar eclipse. Now, that's a big deal astrologically, but it wasn't long before planets started marching into Aries, which is a very enthusiastic fire sign. And as of right now, we have 4 planets in Aries and Chiron, which is an asteroid. The wounded healer is what we call him. They're all in the sign of the warrior. So, cosmically speaking, March came in like an Aries ram, and it's going to stay that way. So, that's just kind of let's look a little forward. We're looking beyond this week. I want you to know that April is full of Aries energy all the time. And I'm going to kind of convince you of why we should love that. And also looking forward, as of April 15th, the next time that moon is in Aries, there's going to be 5 planets there too. And that's going to include Mercury and Mars, which aren't there right now. So, yeah, there's a lot of activity in the sign of Aries. So that's also a plug, an encouragement to go look at your natal charts. Go look and see where Aries, the constellation of Aries, is sitting in your natal chart, because that's where there's a lot of activity, a lot going on, a lot of, especially with Mars. When Mars moves into Aries, it hasn't done it yet. But when it does, then you're going to see a lot of activity there, even more than you see now. And by the way, a lot of people go, oh, well, I don't have any Aries. I don't have any Sagittarius. Yes, you do. Even if you don't have planets that were in those signs at the time that you were born, none of those houses in your natal chart are technically empty. The energy is still there. And especially if you're one of those people that you don't have any planets in Aries, but now, looking at your chart, you've got 5 planets sitting there. Well, that's a big deal. So check that out. And here again, I know that I get very excited. I get very, people say adamant. You don't have to do any of this stuff. But once again, sometimes I see these planets or astrology in general almost like a comet going over, and it's got this long tail, almost like a kite, and we can just reach up and grab some of that energy if we want to. But you know what? There's always going to be something new. There's always going to be something else. So also don't get yourself into a whole dither of, oh my gosh, I didn't set my intentions on the new moon, or, oh, I didn't do this, that, or the other thing. You know what? It shouldn't be such a struggle. It shouldn't be such a worry. But I'm going to give you the reasons that I think you should grab onto some of these tails of these comets, these things that are going on. But you know what? You have to look into your own heart. You have to look into yourself and say, does this interest me? Or I'm going to just sit this one out. I'm just going to check in a couple of weeks or another month or another year, whatever you want. But this week, the sun sitting in Aries is going to make 2 really important connections. Both of them are going to happen on Wednesday. That's March 25th if you're listening to this other than live, if you're listening some other time. The sun is going to actually find itself sitting right with Saturn at 4 degrees. That means they share the astrological space. So, of course, they're not sitting together in the sky. They look like they're sitting together in the sky. That's how it looks to us from planet Earth. But technically, they're sharing the same astrological degree, which is for Aries. Now, on that same day, the sun, which of course is moving much faster than Saturn in terms of astrology, well, that sun is going to also make a very positive, what we call sextile to Pluto, which is sitting over in Aquarius. Now, of course, if you're thinking about this, that means that eventually, within a couple of days, Saturn is also going to make that sextile with Pluto. It's going to be perfect. But I want to say right now that, even though we emphasize a particular day, Like it's going to be on Saturday when Saturn is sextile Pluto. It's going to be on Wednesday when the sun is conjunct Saturn and also sextile Pluto. The truth is, some of these things, especially with Saturn and Pluto, from our perspective, they're moving pretty slow. So when I looked at it, I realized Saturn and Pluto kind of dance back and forth in a sextile for almost a year. Now, it's not perfect like it's going to be on Saturday, but they're dancing back and forth between retrogrades. So we're going to have this energy out there for quite a while, which is also a reason to just relax. Whatever is going to come to you, whatever you're going to need or want in your life, you know what? It's going to be there. So you don't have to go, oh my God, I forgot last weekend. I didn't do anything, whatever. So that energy is going to dance with us for a while. Now, the sun, not so much, because the sun, astrologically speaking, is moving pretty quickly. It spends 30 days in Aries and then it's gone. It'll continue and make different connections with Pluto, of course. But, on Wednesday, when it's actually in the very, very same space as Saturn, and when it's in the same space making that sextile with Pluto, that's pretty exciting. So as I look at these, one thing I know is, and there's new people that join the show every week, and I want to say, hey, welcome, and thank you so much for listening and coming. So I don't want to leave somebody out that goes, what the heck is she talking about? But I also don't want to be totally redundant. But I think we need to do just a little brush up on the sun and on Aries and on the meaning of some of these other planets. So I'd like to start off with a quote from one of my favorite astrologers, Carolyn W. Casey. And one of the reasons I was thinking about this is because I've noticed this week, or in the last few weeks, I've been getting a question which doesn't shock me, but it surprises me. And that is, do you think the world is coming to an end? And it's like, no, I don't. Now, I do think we're in some wild times for sure, but they're not really any wilder than this planet has ever seen. And truly, I don't want to be glib. I don't want to be superficial and say, I don't think these things are serious, either things personally in your life or in the world in general. These are serious situations for the most part. But my belief is that this earth, this life, and everything we perceive in our lives are really classrooms. And class has not been dismissed. And I don't hear that bell ringing anytime soon. So, I know that we could go in some really deep philosophical and spiritual conversations or directions here, and we're not going to do that, but I'm just throwing it out. That's how I'm seeing it. I think these are classrooms. And yeah, we can say, okay, I'm not going to take this class. I'm going to drop this elective. But, these are our classrooms, and we can learn something from every single thing, every single interaction. And right now, some of the things we're learning are about the sun. They're about our identity. They're about standing up for ourselves. It's about Aries fire energy, inspiration. It's about assuming and taking and embracing our own personal authority. Those are some of the things. Now, you can choose to take the elective or maybe not. You can bow out. But I find it really helpful to at least think about it. But here's the quote from Carolyn Casey. Better to create prophecy than to live predictions. The word prediction comes from the same root as predicament, which is almost always something unpleasant. Prophecy, however, implies collaboration with the divine in order to co-create the most interesting, ingenious, and loving world possible. Our work together is thus profit sharing venture. Now, of course, when she says profit, it's PROPHET. It's a profit sharing venture. Astrology can be a remedy for the modernness of our lives by restoring our capacity to receive necessary guidance from without and within. As we reclaim the capacity to hear ourselves think, we once more hear the reassuring voices of the planetary gods. So that's a quote from Carolyn Casey. So now let's do a quick crash course on the sun. And I'm going to start with another quote. This one's from Howard Washington Thurman, who was an author, philosopher, minister. He was a mystic, educator, and a civil rights leader. And he said, don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive. And then go and do that. because what the world needs is people who have come alive. Now, I went and looked at his chart because I thought I've got to see where the fire is in his chart. And by the way, he does not have any Aries because he has like 90% of his planets in only 2 signs. I mean, it was an amazing chart. But the point is, I want you to think about this with Aries because that's what this is about. Aries is about being inspired. That's one of the most important things I think about Aries. It's like, what do you want? What gets you up in the morning? It's ruled by Mars. So it's like, what's your motivation? And I would say we all want to have enthusiasm and energy. We want to feel alive. And that's what the sun is about, and especially the sun in Aries. So when we look at the sun and we think about it astrologically in the chart, it's simply the center of the universe. It's our focal point for describing who we believe we are, how we see ourselves, how we tend to describe ourselves, our sense of self and individuality. Now, it's also how we want others to see us, but kind of hold that for just a second. And even if our sun is badly aspected, meaning, it's got challenging relationships from some of those other planets, we expect or want people on some level to see through to our true selves, our essence. That sun is about self-awareness, self-expression, vitality, literally the energy that we have in our bodies, our psychological resilience, confidence, what we see as our purpose. Think of it as your true colors. Now, Liz Green, famous astrologer, describes the sun as our urge to be ourselves, who we think we are. Lindsay River and Sally Gillespie, who wrote The Knot of Time, say the sun is our centering and creative self, self-awareness, self-expression, vitality, purpose, and will. Now, another idea with the sun is it can be our collective beliefs about who we are. If we looked at all the puzzle pieces of how we describe ourselves, who we think we are, it would be that collection. And if you believe in past lives, then it might even go so far as to say it's a collection of all those things you brought in with you. Let's say you have a playbook. And in your playbook that comes from multiple lifetimes, here's the goals, the assignments, or the tools for this particular lifetime. Now, that's up to you whether you want to believe, it started at birth or it started many thousands of years ago. But underneath it all, despite what anyone else thinks, the sun is self-identity and how we picture ourselves. Now, I'm emphasizing that because compare this to the rising sign in astrology. Now, the rising sign is the constellation of stars that was on literally the eastern horizon at the time that we were born. So we say that's the first house cusp or the rising sign, our ascendant. What sign was ascending? But that's how we project our personalities. So it's not that unusual to see somebody, like here's an example, somebody who might be a shy or a very introverted Virgo, or possibly a Pisces. That's their sun, but they appear bigger than life because they have a Leo or a Sagittarian rising. But when they're home alone, when nobody's watching, they are their sun sign. It's how we see ourselves. And I think that's an important distinction because I also imagine it that, let's take there again, that Virgo or Pisces sun, and they're sitting there and saying, what, that's who I really want to be in this lifetime. That's who I am. But I need to get out there and meet and greet. And in order to really get along in life the way I want to, I need to have this kind of alter ego. And so that alter ego, that meet and greet personality, that mask is what I put on with my rising sign. So often when, people, kind of the dating scene, they meet somebody and they describe them and then later they go, boy, I didn't have any idea who they really were. Well, we're almost always meeting somebody's rising sign. And eventually we're going to meet their sun. And sometimes those are very similar energies and sometimes they're not. But just recognize there's a difference. How you see yourself is your thing. It doesn't have to be somebody else's thing, but you do get to decide how much of that do you want to show somebody else. So that sun in astrology is a proxy for our sense of individuality and ego. It's, and the sun's interactions with other planets can illuminate what we are thinking, feeling, believing, and maybe hoping is true about ourselves. So, there again, when we look at those natal charts and we see a sun connected to Pluto, we're a transformational person. We are somebody with a purpose that comes in to change, have an influence on other people. Or possibly our sun is with our Venus. A lot of times you find those people are very good looking, they're beautiful, or appearances are very important to them. Maybe you've got the sun sitting next to Mercury and the person loves to talk. They see themselves as very linked to their minds or what they're thinking. So that's just a few examples of how that can change. But the sun currently, right now, it's going through fiery Aries. And so we all have that kind of feeling right now. And of course, those transiting planets never override our natal planets. They don't override those imprinted patterns of who we are, but they do suggest a collective identity for the planet and a sense of something that we are picking up on at the moment. And think of it maybe like as a voice calling to you. Aries going, hey guys, look over here. It's a role we can choose to play. And in Aries, the sun's voice, I think it's more like a shout because it's going, follow me. I'm going places. I'm in a hurry. So if you want to go with me, you better hurry to catch up. So as we look at this kind of Aries energy and these Aries traits, no, not every person is going to say, okay, now I'm going to become an Aries, but you can become infused with this kind of enthusiasm while the sun is there and while those other planets are there. So here again, I just want to throw out a few more things about Aries and who it is so that we're really focusing on some of the positive things. Because quite frankly, every planet, every sign has those two sides, right? There's a shadow side. So as enthusiastic as Aries is, it can be boisterous and domineering. It can be combative. Kind of the classic road rage would be an Aries personality. But that's because it's energetic, enthusiastic, and it wants to inspire and influence people. So what are you going to focus on? Sometimes you kind of get both sides of it. This is very courageous energy, fearless kind of energy. If you look at the mythology of Aries as a sign, it's Jason and the Argonauts, going off on an adventure, a journey, a challenge. In fact, to Aries, life has meaning only when there's a challenge, a competition, or a goal. Growth occurs through a path of action and initiation. And in fact, one thing I always think about with Aries, like especially if I'm talking about love relationships or romance or just getting along with people, Aries is not the one who says, hey, let's cuddle up on the couch. Aries wants to go out and do something. And if anything, what is kind of funny about it, Aries will even start an argument just to get the energy moving. Because that's how they roll. They don't want to sit and be introspective and quiet. Aries wants to pit themselves against something. They love the challenge. They want to go rock climbing. They want to go hiking. They want to do something physical. They want to move. So that's their natural state. And so while we have all these planets in Aries, you might find that you're very energetic. And in fact, yesterday, I was thinking about that a lot because I got up and all of a sudden I'm going, I'm going to break down these boxes. I'm going to do this. And then I'm going to move on to that. And I just found myself going from thing to thing, all these physical activities. And I kind of had to stop around 2:00 and go, you're going to wear yourself out if you're not careful here. But I thought, boy, if that is an Aries energy, just swooping in and going, let's get all this done. So enjoy the amount of energy that you want to channel for yourself. And when you look at Aries, those archetypes are the ram. They're leading with their head. And when I say head, I'm not talking intelligence. I'm saying their heads. Those rams, they will just butt up against and hit something. They're going to challenge themselves. They're not going to, in a sense, save themselves. They're going to just push right through. Aries are warriors and pioneers They're daredevils and survivors. Now, they also resonate with the idea of a fool, because you know what? They'll take a risk. And sometimes those risks really pay off and sometimes they don't. Now, if you like tarot, one of the archetypes here for Aries too is the Emperor, and I love that because Aries says, "I'm not going to sit by and let somebody else make all the rules for me. I'm going to take charge here. I'm going to set up the rules. I'm going to set up the structure of what's going to work for me. I'm going to go after some goals and structures in my life," which is very, very nice with Saturn, the planet of structure, now sitting in Aries. Now, a couple people, and I'm not throwing in quotes here, but just to give you an idea, some personality styles of Sun and Aries. We mentioned many of these last week. William Shatner, Maya Angelou, Gloria Steinem, Rachel Maddow, Celine Dion, and Lady Gaga. Now, compare that, though, with people with rising signs with Aries. Bette Midler is a rising sign Aries, Barbara Streisand, and Joan Rivers. And I particularly wanted Barbara Streisand to be in there because as much as she seems like a very strong, out there, put it out there kind of person, she's actually, she has always made it a big deal that she doesn't like to perform, that she gets stage fright. She doesn't really want to be out there. She has to kind of force herself to do that. So that might be an example. And by the way, she's a Taurus sun. That is an example of somebody who probably came into this lifetime saying, I've got all these talents, but I'm going to have to really, really work at projecting myself out there. So what did she do? If you want to think about it, very consciously, she gave herself a rising sign in Aries because her Taurus sun maybe said, that's what I'm going to have to do to get myself out there. That's what I'm going to have to do to make this work. Now, I know I'm probably oversimplifying that, but it's just an example of there's a real difference between the rising sign and the sun. And that's why sometimes you go, oh, that person, she's just so out there. Well, no, see her at home, she's going to be a very different person. So think about, this is about the colors. What are your colors? And when I say that, what I mean is that, the colors of your life are who you are as a sun. But while the sun is sitting in Aries, you might want to think about those fire colors, gold and yellow and orange and red and purple. Because if you need some motivation in your life, if you need some inspiration, you may want to pop some of those colors if that's not what you usually do. Now, this week, let's move on. The sun joins Saturn. Now, Saturn is what we call the disciplinarian. It's the planet of purpose. It's also sitting at 4 Aries as of tomorrow. I mean, and here again, think about how close they are today, but tomorrow they're going to be perfect. But here again, if you just kind of brainstorm and you think, okay, what happens when you put these things together? When you put the sun ego with the idea of Saturn, the disciplinarian. Well, all kinds of things can manifest. I want you to know because, and here again, just brainstorming, this is a serious energy. It's intensely responsible. It's hardworking, driven to achieve or to accomplish or to meet a goal. Persistent. It's not looking for the easy way out or the easy way to do something. But it's an energy that infuses us not only with energy, but boy, we're really going to put our kind of nose to the grindstone and go, get there, do this. It's a driven kind of energy. But that drive can also be towards things like spiritual qualities or mastery, because it's this, I want to elevate myself. I want to really do something beyond, beyond Ananda, so to speak. So, and it tends to be thrifty, not wasting things, getting really down to earth, even though it's in Aries. And there again, remember the filter, the vehicle it's using is Aries, which is very spontaneous, which I think just at the outset, you go, oh my God, you've got Aries, spontaneous, impulsive. I want to go do this. But now you've got this combination of the sun and Saturn being very disciplined and methodical. But what I want you to remember, and here again, I think it's really fun to play with planetary meanings, and the signs. As I said, brainstorm. Do that for yourself. Consider what you think are some of the possibilities. But what comes to me, and the bottom line, I think, is that It's our relationship with authority when the sun and Saturn come together. And so, does that mean we automatically get into some kind of power struggle? It's possible. Maybe we do. I mean, maybe it's even with another driver, or maybe there is a struggle. But I want you to know an external struggle, a power struggle, is actually a representation of struggling with your own inner authority and wanting to embrace more of a sense of being the author of your own life and having more control. So, see, I think that Sun Saturn tomorrow and throughout this week and moving forward is our need to really take more control over ourselves. Maybe it is a place where we want to be more disciplined and we haven't been. And we want to do that. Or maybe it's just asserting ourselves a little bit more, just taking responsibility in some way, or setting up a pattern or a structure for ourselves. So even though here again can mean lots and lots of things, just recognize authority is a big word concept issue with Saturn and the sun coming together with Saturn. We're talking about our own authorship. How do you want to be the controller, the author of your own life? And recognize automatically, there's a lot of people in the world, right? Billions. We cannot control other people. We cannot control everything that's going to happen to us. But we always, always have control over the lesson, how we see it as beneficial to ourselves, that we can always see everything as giving us the possibility of learning something new or learning something that's valuable. And of course, I personally want lessons that are fun versus challenging, but you know what? That's not always going to happen. And the more I can see even a situation which proves to be an obstacle, a delay, a slowdown, or something I didn't want, if I just take a step back, and I'm talking in my mind, maybe physically too, but if I take that step back, then guess what? I'm going to realize this was something very valuable to me. It kept me from missing something on the path. Now, it may be that for some of us, we're just reconsidering our purpose. We're looking at something and going, wow, I spend 40% of my time doing such and such. And that's really only 5% of my goals. It's just not that important to me anymore. So why am I doing that? So, it's easy to kind of look at the outset and go, oh, Saturn sitting on my sun, I'm going to have power struggles. Things aren't going to work for me. I'm going to be limited. No, it's about purposefully simplifying. Reconsider your purpose and what you want to see happen in your life. Saturn encourages us to strike a balance and to respect our natural limitations. Just like when I was saying yesterday, I could have gone full bore. I could have just kept going and then just dropped, right? But I have to look at my schedule and say, what else do I need to do today? Am I going to spend all my energy before lunchtime? So Saturn just says, okay, what's your purpose here? Strike a balance, respect natural boundaries, but know that you're creating the boundaries or accepting whatever boundaries are in your life that you really can't change. There again, that whole idea is so important of, some things we just have to accept. We can't change them. But when we can change something, then go for those things. Go for those things. So another couple of ideas before we leave the Sun Saturn. Although the Sun Saturn conjunction, the perfection of it happens on Wednesday, I want you to know that this is really a seed that's being planted that takes a whole year to come to completion, because it really is in effect until the next time the Sun and Saturn catch up with each other, which they do once a year. Because as that Sun goes through every single sign through the year, eventually it's going to catch up with Saturn again. And of course, next year, Saturn will still be in Aries. So the next time it will be in Aries too. But think about that too, because technically, I think, and I mean, I checked this a couple times, I hope I'm right, we have not had the Sun conjunct Saturn in Aries since 1998. Because see, sometimes, wherever the Sun is where, or wherever Saturn is where the Sun is going to catch up with it. So, see, this is different. We've been having the Sun conjunct Saturn the last few years in Pisces. This time it's in Aries. And like I said, it hasn't happened since 1998. So, this is going to feel different. This year does feel different, but we are going into this year long pattern. It's very much about personal truth, responsibility, power, and authority. And so I think, some of the outcomes really could be maybe we want to assume more leadership or mentoring, using our expertise for a purpose. That could be something that is going on for us. But recognize that Aries wants things fast and quick, and it can't necessarily be that way. But as we can kind of keep working with this energy through the year, we'll get a very healthy return on our investment. I mean, we truly will. But remember, just even if you just want to kind of grab onto a little piece of this tale, this really is about having lots of energy, just feeling excited about something. And I mean, I get that way sometimes where I guess I'm bored or I'm just not motivated. I want something new. And it's just nice to be excited. So, if you find yourself just with the blahs, ennui, this is a great energy because it's really going to help us feel excited about something in our lives. Now, and Saturn, by the way, can be a really demanding taskmaster, as can Pluto. And I wanted to talk about Pluto too, because another piece of this puzzle is that Aries Sun is in a positive sextile to Pluto in Aquarius. And there again, that's going to happen many, many times because Pluto's staying in Aquarius until what, 2042, something like that. And what that adds is some similar characteristics. But remember, Pluto is a planet of change and evolution and transformation. So, you know what this does? And mixed with the sun, I think one of the big takeaways is it's a powerful ability for self improvement, personal growth. Now, for some people, that literally means maybe a healing is coming, for them. Maybe you're moving through an emotional or psychological trauma or complexes that have been involved in your life for forever. Maybe it's about spiritual development. But, Pluto he's a powerful planet when we think about it astrologically. Regeneration and growth. It's about survival. No obstacle or challenge is too great when you put the sun and Pluto together. So there again, think about, is there something in your life you just go, I just really want to improve this. I want to feel better about myself. Well, kind of invite the sun Pluto, sextile into your life because you're going to have remarkable willpower if you want it and determination to succeed. But I also think this is the kind of energy that really can change us in extraordinary ways, physically, emotionally, psychologically. So, invite, reach up and grab that energy for personal improvement and to target specific things. And I think like places where we feel weak or unprepared or inexperienced, or like I said, maybe it's a physical illness or maybe it's some kind of trauma and we just really want to address those things in our life. Well, this is a good time to do it. So I'm also going to throw out a few people that have these conjunctions and these sextiles. We'll do that quickly. And a couple of quotes, not too many. I'm not doing too many quotes today because a lot going on. But the sun conjunct Saturn. Here's a few people that have that. Jonathan Winters. Remember the comedian actor? And I have a couple of quick quotes because they're so perfect for the sun sitting right next to Saturn. He said, if your ship doesn't come in, swim out to it. And see, I love that because see, I'm not waiting. I'm doing this. So that's sun conjunct Saturn. I'm making a plan. If the ship doesn't come, I'm swimming out to it. Kobe Bryant, another person who just has an incredible number of quotes about that so reflect his sun conjunct Saturn. He said, everything negative, pressure, challenges, it's all an opportunity for me to rise. How is that? Is that great or what? Wolfgang Mozart. He said, I pay no attention whatsoever to anybody's praise or blame. I simply follow my own feelings. See that strength of having Sun sitting next to Saturn. Betty Davis has it also, and hers is even in Aries. Thomas Edison was born with this, and also the quarterback Tom Brady have Sun conjunct Saturn. So, kind of that will of come hell or high water, I guess that's what they say. I'm doing this. That's Sun conjunct Saturn. So if there's something you want to get done in your life, take those reins. All right, now Sun sextile Pluto. Albert Einstein was born with that. And here again, changing the world, changing the way we see the world. That Pluto, regeneration, transformation. Audrey Hepburn. And I put her in there too because she spent the greater portion of the last part of her life all in service. And I can't tell you all of the charities and the things that she did, but it was hands-on service, I think, in Africa. And, and she's very well known for those things, maybe not as well as for her acting, but that's how she spent the rest of her life. And then Bob Dylan. And I put him in there because, I think his music was a life changer for many people. It precipitated a different way of looking at the world. Okay, so I know we have some time left, and what I want to do is talk about that Saturn sextile Pluto. Now we're moving to Saturday, but like I said, this is already in range, guys, and it's going to be in range for about a year. Give or take. We're going to see them move a little bit farther apart, depending on Saturn's moving faster, but Saturn will retrograde and Pluto will retrograde. So they're going to keep doing this little dance, but they're going to relatively stay within sextile range for about a year until next spring. So this is a connection that can really generate fabulous energy, helping us to profoundly embrace what it means to live our lives as, we've mentioned this, authors and not as victims of a script or an invisible pattern. Now, I know those patterns are there. I know that we see that. It's like, oh, well, this is who I am and this is what happened to me. But you know what? Pluto says, it doesn't matter what happened to you. I'm about transformation and change. And Saturn says, and I'm the disciplinarian. You want something different? We're going to rewrite the pattern. All right. This is so, so powerful. And there again, it's not just Saturday. So this energy suggests that we can embrace our true nature. It's about maturity as living on planet Earth, not just being little kids, but really taking control. It's about willpower and discipline, but it's also about hard work to gain a clearer vision and perspective on our lives. Not wasting anything, taking control of our feelings and our attitudes, and climbing steadily towards those goals, never quitting. It's a very serious-minded kind of energy, responsible and resourceful. But also, these are power brokers, these two planets. Now, I guess I say that a lot. I say Mars is a power broker too. But boy, you take Saturn and Pluto, they are power brokers. And they can work together in kind of an alchemical way, creating alchemy. And even though in the material universe it takes time and continual practice to reach ambitious goals, we just have the patience to do it when we put these two planets together. And I think Saturn suggests that that's what we need. This very cautious, methodical approach is going to work. And when I say cautious, maybe I should say thoughtful approach to what's happening for us. But add that Pluto, because Pluto says meaningful and profound change can happen when we respect the process instead of looking for instant answers, quick fixes, and solutions that don't require or involve our complete participation. Now, this is important. This is something that kind of just keeps coming to me as I think about Saturn and Pluto. This isn't about waving magic wands. or repeating magic incantations or affirmations, or handing the reins over to somebody else. And I'm saying this because not that, we all have these little, what I call shortcuts. I mean, I love my crystals. I love my candles. I love my essential oils. I love all these things. And I love my affirmations. I love quotes. I've got them all over my office. I read them continually. But I want you to know that this isn't a situation where you kind of go, oh, I want this. I'm going to kind of hand it over. I'm just going to say, this is what I want. I'm going to put it in the magic box or burn my, burn the paper, whatever. Now, I know I sound like I'm knocking those things, and I don't really mean to, because I love the rituals. I think the rituals are fun. But man, this is down to earth energy, Saturn and Pluto. And I just want you to know, if you work it, it's going to work for you. But if you want the easy way out, these are not the two planets for you. This is about working a plan. And there again, it can be exciting, it can be fun. It doesn't have to be burdensome. But this isn't about, like I said, just thinking that magic is going to come along and something in your life is going to change. It says, you work with us, we'll work with you. Now, here are some people that have Saturn sextile Pluto. And once again, a pretty important, powerful energy. Georgia O'Keeffe. Remember the stuff that she did? Her landscapes and her flowers, and she's a painter. I mean, I'm sure all of you know her. And here again, these people, many of them had a transformational effect on the kind of generation they were born into, and for many generations to come. So Georgia O'Keeffe, Jimi Hendrix, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Brian Wilson, Janis Joplin. Now, I suspect, and I didn't look up all their birthdays, or I don't have them in front of me, that because Saturn was sextile Pluto for a period of time, like it's probably not surprising Paul McCartney and George Harrison, born relatively in the same period, have it. And see Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and Brian Wilson too. So, but those are people that, I'd be surprised if any of you say, I don't know their name. And maybe you like their music, you don't like their music, but you know who they are. They had an influential effect on the world. Irving Berlin. I mean, can you really not know who Irving Berlin is? And his, music, it's just ubiquitous. And George Bernard Shaw. And of course, there are just so many more. And I think with George Bernard Shaw, not only do a lot of people know who he is, but his quotes, some of the things he has said are just infused in our language and our culture. Okay, so as we look at this, I just want you to know these are exciting things, that you put the sun, you put Saturn and Pluto working together. We've got some really wonderful, powerful energy for moving our own lives, for taking more charge of our lives, for taking more control over those things that we can control in our lives. So here's a few ideas, and maybe too many, but I kind of wanted to give you something to kind of wrap up this energy. And by the way, I don't remember exactly when it's going to be. Once Saturn is not sextile to Pluto anymore after this year, it's going to be a long time before it's there again. A long time. Because Saturn will continue to move on every 2.5 years, it'll change signs. So eventually it's going to trine, Pluto, and eventually it's going to square Pluto, etc. But these are Saturn connections with Pluto are not that, they're not an everyday thing. So this is special. But there again, it's up to you. What do you feel? Do you see that comet going over? Do you see something you want to reach up and grab or not? But you got some time. It's going to be there for a while. But here are kind of my parting comments. Be willing to use every interaction, and especially the challenges and the obstacles, as opportunities to grow. They're your classroom. And you know what? You can have fun. Some of these things are going to be hard, but assume there's a purpose in everything. I mean, how would your life be different if you assumed there was a purpose, a positive, beneficial purpose to every single thing that happens? And you're always looking for the jewel inside whatever the situation is. Also, ride whatever waves come your way. You know, we're not going to be able to control everything, but take advantage of where life is taking you. Ride the waves, go with the flow. Also, think about how you create your own luck. And some of the ways we do that is by taking a risk and stretching ourselves. That is Aries. We're probably not going to, have some amazing growth opportunity if we're not taking any risks, if we're just not even leaving our couch. But there again, it can be internal, it can be psychological and emotional. But take a risk, stretch yourself, think big, think large. Try not to let something be limited of never done this before, can't do this, whatever. Think large. Another thing we can do is try to see the interconnection between all things. Try to see it as, when I said, there's a purpose in everything. What is the pattern? Are there background patterns that we're just not even seeing? All these interconnections between things, and all of a sudden our eyes are opened up. It's kind of like the Matrix, right? So, you might even just kind of stretch yourself by trying to say, I don't know what the pattern is between all these events. I don't know what the background pattern or the interconnection is between all people, but I'm willing to try to see the pattern. Kind of like that. I can't remember what they're called, but when you look at a picture and when you soften your focus, you see another picture inside. That's what I'm talking about. Maybe you just say, I want to see the interconnection. I really want to see a different picture. Adapt in that same way, riding the waves, adapt to changing situations. Be willing to do that. And I know with Saturn, we're kind of holding on tight to some things, but try to adapt to situations if you can. Try to see yourself in new ways. Now, that's going to be so important with these sun connections. Experiment with self-discovery. All right? Would you like to really see something new about yourself, something really exciting about yourself? Reconsider how you respond to criticism or disapproval. Because do you stop before even starting to do something because you're worried about what other people are going to say? Think about that. Test your limits, strike a balance. If you go too far out, or you lose your audience, or you're damaging a relationship, you can always change it. But how are you going to know what those limits are if you don't take a chance? Okay. All right. Well, we got to wrap up the show. So heads up for next week, Venus is going to change signs. She's going to head home to Taurus. That is going to happen on Monday. So before we have another show, it's going to happen, but we'll probably talk about it on Monday. And also there's going to be a full moon next week in Libra, the sign of partnership. It's going to be on April 1st. So that could be kind of interesting. So everybody, thank you so much for being here, and for everybody in the chat room. And Quelly, I see that you came in during the show. Thank you so much for doing that. And thanks to everybody who's over there and writing comments. And also thanks to our producer, Serena, who just keeps everything on track and kind of holds my hand with all this technology, that some of which I'm not, very familiar with. So thank you, Serena. And I hope that you'll stay tuned, because up next is Empowerment with Kelly Whetstone. You can find her on 12radio.com or on her YouTube channel, which there again, her show is the same name as her channel, Empowerment with Kelly Whetstone. Now, here's the quote of the week. It's kind of a little bit unusual, but it made me laugh out loud when I heard it. It's Celine Dion, who actually has Sun conjunct Saturn in Aries. She also has a North Node in Aries, which means it's her destiny to really explore this Aries energy in this lifetime. And she says, I've never been cool and I don't care. Now, I don't know about you, but that literally made me laugh when I heard it. I'm not sure it's perfectly true, but I can hear her saying that. This is CA signing out. You can find me for personal sessions on one2listen.com. Please feel free to request a scheduled call at a time that's good for you, or just go over to the site and see if I'm available. And if I'm not, you can always request a callback. And if I'm available, then I will sign on and we can talk. You have been listening to Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks on 12radio.com, and we are streaming on YouTube, where we are changing the way that we are now listening to the Sun and Saturn and Pluto, who are the cosmic movers and shakers for this week.